We'll talk about history for a minute. Modern history versus ancient history. More important, ancient history. Or the lie that we know of that's history. The old caveat, there's this old saying that the victors write the history. Holds a lot of weight. There are times when I sit there and I ponder things. I'll see something and I'll think back. How much of the world's history, the real history of the world, has gone missing, that no longer exists, was never recorded? Just like how much of the history as we know it has been rewritten, revised, reworded, and changed. And I'll use a brief example, and I'm sure there'll be always somebody out there that will get annoyed or angry that I've suggested. But the Bible is one of the oldest written books of the modern world and the near ancient world. It's roughly 1,800 years old, 1,600 years old, depending on who you ask. I can't give you an exact date because there is no exact date when it was compiled and put together. And it was compiled of most of the stories of the Bible, most of the books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Corinthians, etc., etc. All these are based off of text works and other writings that predate the compilation of the Bible. Now, in the centuries since that compilation, since they decided what would be canon and what wouldn't be canon, if you will, in the Christian Bible, the Bible itself has undergone a number of significant adaptations. In the earliest days, every Bible, like most books, were handwritten. There were no, this is before Luther came up with the ability to publish things and mass produce stuff, mass publication. And everything was handwritten. Everything was at the fingertips of the particular monk or sage or learned person who was doing the i.e. translating and or copying. That they were going to, whether they were going to copy that book verbatim, exactly how the previous version showed it to say and do, or were they going to take some liberties, under the idea of, well, I don't think they interpret it this way. I don't think they meant that, but they meant this. Or the literal, well, we don't use this term anymore. Let's use something today more modern for our era kind of rendition. And or the occasional slips where you're translating a vast volume of written text by hand. You can inadvertently slip and leave out a phrase or a paragraph or pieces or bits or pieces, or you may lose your place and come back and ad lib once again. Or you might come off and go off onto a tangent without really realizing you're doing it. I imagine it takes a great deal of discipline to sit down and spend a lifetime copying one book to make extra copies. And how many copies can an individual make in a year, kind of thing? I'm just saying. Then we look at the intentional revisions. Now, bear with me. In my 54 years, I was, when I was a young man, the King James Bible was the standard go-to Bible for the Christian church, for the Christian faith, at least the Pentecostal church that I grew up in. That was the standard Bible. At some point in the late 90s or late 80s, the New Word Bible came out. And what it was is a translation, an up-to-date version of the King James Bible in modern terminology, and using modern verbiage. That sounds pretty simple. We're just modernizing the word as it is. But the incarnations, the intonations, the meaning behind the word can be subtly changed by doing this. And you have to figure that there's more than just, because the King James Version was a later version of yet another version of the Bible, etc., etc. And there are numerous other versions of the Bible as well. The Gideon Bible is a variant of the King James. You don't think so because you say it's the King James Version, but it is, but it's not. It's the Gideon Bible, and so on. So when I look at the New Age Bible and how it's taken the old, some of the very convoluted, very hard to understand words and the meanings behind them, and gave the modern version of those words, things change very subtly. There may be discrepancies now in that translation, right? So we're just looking at the Bible. Now I'm going to go on to the grander scheme of things. When I talk and I listen to people, and I think, because I was trying to come up with something for this channel, and that didn't sound like me babbling my way through something, and this still is probably that. I was looking at the Vimanas from ancient Indian folklore, the flying machines of the gods, etc., and the war the gods fought. And I was trying to pin down the timeline. And a lot of them said 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. Some of them say it was longer than this. And I had to wonder if because there's been a few off the wall ideologies out there, or ideas that part of the fall of Atlantis was not natural in formation, but it was a conflict. There was some kind of conflict, or a large conflict, that they were destroyed. And the plausibility, because they claim they had flying airships as well, that Atlantis' culture and technology was advanced enough that they had aircraft of sorts by our ancient ancestors. Very primitive understanding of anything that can fly. What were the odds that this conflict involved India and Atlantis? That there was not some sort of conflict, whether this was two different groups and societies at war, and they were both advanced for their time, or if they were outside entities having a conflict amongst themselves, which wouldn't be unreasonable or unheard of, because people are people no matter what you are. What's the possibilities? So then I got thinking about the history, and as we know it, everybody that probably views any of this kind of stuff has to be familiar with the Library of Alexandria and its destruction. There's also numerous inclinations over the centuries of other places where artworks and history books and scrolls and works of previous ancient people were gathered for various purposes. It's implied that for example, that the Catholic Church and the Vatican's library, its secret library, has vast amounts of ancient text and material from thousands of years ago, maybe even longer than that. And that they continue to try to, certain elements among them, they continue to try to preserve as best they can. Because you got to acknowledge that most material that written word is put on deteriorates. It just does. We can't have everything on stone tablets, and even stone tablets can break and fracture. So anything that was produced after the stone tablet using parchments or paper-like products or skin or whatever, that stuff's all prone to insects and age and material degradation, whether the material itself rots away or becomes intangible. The ink or the material, the material used to actually write the words on the pages itself deteriorates and fades away. Then there's the wanton, purposefully destroyed material. So in history, as recent as the Second World War, and even more recent times, here in America, when we had something called the Satanic Panic, where there was this attempt to actually erase certain types of literature from the libraries of the country, that there's always been a human element that does not agree with something in the history books, and they want it removed. And is how arrogant and how foolish is that in your thought, in my thought? I look at it and I think it's bad enough that that age takes its toll on any kind of written material. That everything's suspect. Anything that was copied from previous editions of something is potentially suspect because of numerous ways, as I've already listed, of that being changed. Then there's the intentional changing, where religious organizations, when the conquistadors scoured Central America, amongst them were members of the clergy, and those clergy went out of their way to destroy a lot of material that they thought was blasphemous or heretical or just bad ideas. How much was lost? How many sciences, how much knowledge did our ancestors gain and lose and regain and lose and regain, and each time being slightly different from the last? So we look at modern day, and we talk about current political system in America, where you can't really trust the people you're supposed to trust. There was a time when the media was the media, and the press was very adamant about purity, that they would only report as it was, not as we want it to be. They didn't take sides as much as possible, because it's impossible for humans to not have their own personal views and opinions and agendas, and not have them affect themselves. God bless you that you can, if you can truly stay that neutral ground. But now everything's fake news or questioned news. Somebody says something and 10 other people come up and say, oh, that's not how it was, or this is how it is, or they're wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, how much of the ancient history, as we know it, is false, is fantasy? How much things that we take for granted as absolutes? Now, I see this in geography, or geology, and in archaeology a lot. You get camps, and you either have this dead set view on how certain things have to be, because this is how the establishment will accept them, and they won't accept anything else. And if you can see your academic career destroyed, your works blacklisted, if you don't follow the status quo, if you dare challenge. And there are some that do dare challenge, and they challenge enough and long enough, and eventually they're vindicated. But many others throw their hands up or cover their eyes or stomp off into a corner somewhere, and that's that. The establishment won, and the establishment's view on history predominates. So how much of this stuff that we know is true and not? And it's this implication that humanity only goes back 5,000 or 6,000 years, and yet we're seeing more and more evidence of much older civilizations on the planet. Great catastrophic changes took place. The Ice Age in the 12,000 years ago, and it's sudden over a few hundred years warming up, erased a lot of evidence. A lot of those civilizations lived closer, like they do today, live on the edges of the oceans, the Great Water, and suddenly the water raised by 300-400 feet. Now they're buried and washed away and destroyed. Conquering armies come in and decimate and destroy. Recent times again. In the last couple decades, we've seen terrorist groups and organizations and whatever you want to call it up here in the Middle East, and ISIS and things like that. What do? They one of their agendas was to rewrite history, or to get rid of some part of it they didn't like. So they went in and they defaced artifacts and ancient locations. They destroyed libraries. So just another example of human insanity, the human condition that's just very hard, very stupid in many short-sighted ways. We have both an advantage and a disadvantage in today's world when it comes to our history. Modern history is recorded on digital format more and more than it is on physical format. And most of the physical format we use today is not very durable either. Look at your newspapers, very thin material, very cheap ink, and very easily destroyed or mutilated by moisture, et cetera, et cetera. The electronic media, everything we do, like this video I'm doing now, potentially can still be here 500 years from now for somebody who's looking around going, what was this idiot talking about? right? Because it's supposedly going to be, saved forever until at least YouTube decides it's time to flush the toilet and free up some data space in their storage, because they can do that pretty much at the touch of a few keystrokes, and everything that we put in here could be gone, never to be seen again. So our modern history is subject to even more influence from outside sources. Now, it's not a handful of people dabbling in recording our history, and it's many people. And every one of us have an opportunity in a social platform to put our 2 cents worth in, further muddling and muddling up. So perhaps, just for perhaps, as an example, 80-90% of the topics on history and revisions of history and whether the history is accurate or true or manufactured suddenly are deleted and tossed away, and only a small percentage remains, including this video. So 500 years from now, somebody wanting to look up on the topic does a little bit of research and they get my video. What are they going to think of it? What are they going to take out of it? Are they going to dismiss it outright? What do you think of that? What's your take on that? How does our understanding of the world around us change and are affected by the ability to alter and change and destroy and delete the history general? What's real and what isn't? What's acceptable, what isn't? So we talk about, well, are aliens real? There's lots and lots and lots of mythology and lots of things, physical things, that suggest something someplace at some point in our past was vastly different than what most people today accept. And we're more and more inclined to look at that with an open mind today than they were 20 years ago. You go back to when we were kids. I'm 54. If I go back when I was when I was 10, a lot more people would dismiss this kind of stuff as crazy talk. I mean, we look at a modern history book that I had when I was a kid, and it was written in the 40s and 50s, and was still being used in the late 70s or the 80s. Then it's revised in the 80s. We look at some of our racial issues today, and part of that's because it's ignorance. Part of it's because it's willful arrogance and stupidity. But there's still some ignorance involved. There's a lot of poorly educated people when it comes to race relations and how things should work. How do you tell the truth from the false? How do you make that decision if you don't have access to true truth? When everything's actually false. There is no real, true, unadulterated world history at all. None of it. Not one page hasn't been subjected to edits or alterations or changes of opinion and changes of view and interpretations. Just saying. So next time, this is Rick. Hope you enjoy your weekend.